welcome to another episode of Don't Be Insecure. I'm your co-host, Joe Woodwell at StrikeReady, along with my co-host, Shane Kroening at Qualys. And today we've got an exciting guest. And by exciting, I mean exciting because of his ability to get things done early on as a CISO, not kind of trying to figure out the lay of the land and playing politics and this and that, but actually improving security best practices at his organization in a very, very short time frame. You'll see what I mean when we get started. In order to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane and let Shane introduce you to our guest.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and I'm super excited for this episode as well. And today we've got Brent Deterding with AFNI. For those who don't know Brent, he is the Chief Information Security Officer over there. He worked for about 19 years at SecureWorks, which is a cybersecurity firm, before kind of making the jump into the CISO role, if you will. And yeah, like Joe said, we're going to talk with him today a lot about his version of being a CISO, what that means to him, how he handles stress in his life, being such a high profile role at a large organization. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of what he thinks are some basic practices that we all should be doing to have better cyber hygiene. So with that, let's get into it.
The fastest way to turbocharge Qualys VMDR is to discover the assets you're currently blind to. If you've only identified 70% of cyber assets, you're only protecting 70%. Luckily, Qualys has you covered. Try Qualys CSAM with External Attack Surface Management to locate those unknown assets and add them to your vulnerability management program. Now you can find cyber assets exposed to attackers through mergers and acquisitions, detect vulnerabilities from previously unknown devices and risky ports, prioritize with Qualys TrueRisk, and remediate up to 50% faster than with point solutions. Try Qualys CSAM with External Attack Surface Management free for 30 days to discover the unknowns in your organization.
So Joe, today we've got Brent on the line with us, Brent Deterding, the Chief Information Security Officer over at AFNI. Brent, great to have you here this morning. Thanks for joining us on a Friday, albeit even more so. Excited to talk to you today. If you could just kind of introduce yourself, share a little bit about your story, give a little 5-minute, who is Brent? Where do you come from? Why are you in security? That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brent Deterding. I've been doing this for a long, long time, 25 years, probably, something like that. I'm a little bit unique among CISOs in a couple different ways. One of which is that I worked on the vendor side for 19 years. I worked for a company called SecureWorks, catch the bad guy early in the kill chain kind of thing. 15, I was employee number 21, something like that. 15 years in various roles within operations, and then 4 years in a global sales overlay role. So I've carried a quota, right? I've been in a lot of sales calls. One of the cool things, and now I'm a CISO, so that makes me unique in one way. One thing that I love that did for me is it gave me thousands, at least hundreds, thousands of data points about different organizations across all different verticals, all different types of scenarios. And I've been on the phone, right? Ransomware wasn't a thing in 2005, right? Or 2003 or whatever, but the firewall was. So I've been on the other end of the line with people who are having the worst day of their year, if not their career, a lot of times, right? And so dealing with that kind of scenario really gives you a lot of insight into companies, organizations, what's possible, what's not possible, culture, dynamics, technology, people, process, technology, all that stuff. And that has served me extremely well as the CISO. The other way that I'm kind of unique is that I love my job. Like, I'm happy. I'm joyful. The stress of being a CISO is not a burden to me. And my satisfaction is through the roof. And it's not a small environment. I mean, we're a privately held company, but we're, over 10,000 employees, right? Around the world, a global team, have a couple different business sides of the business and all that. So like, I've been there and done that with a whole lot of CISO stuff. I've done the incidents. I faced named threat actors, Scattered Spider, who took down MGM, Zers, and Clorox and all them. Faced them in 22. Know all about them, right? I'd been a CISO for like 3 months when I faced them. Reduced my cyber insurance by half over the course of 2 years. The premiums, I mean, that's cool. Like that's real deal CISO stuff. But yet to have that and not have the stress be a burden and to be happy, it's a little bit unique, at least in my observation, right? So it's fun. I like it, and I love doing podcasts. I love talking to people. I love getting other opinions. And one of the big reasons why I do that so much is because if I believe X because A, B, and C, and you know about D, E, and F, then I want to benefit. Like being that I was on the vendor side, I understand that like I would talk to companies, right? And you leave the sales meeting, you have the little post call with your sellers or whatever, and you go, hey, they're owned. And they go, what? I didn't hear anything like that. You're like, nah, I can smell it. I can smell it. They're owned. Like, make sure they have the IR hotline number because they don't even know how bad they are. And then, sure enough, more often than not, you're right. And you're like, told you. And I'm like, how do you know that? And you're like, yeah, I can smell it. Like, you get that instinct. So I talk to a lot of vendors. I talk to a lot of people. I have a pretty big network of people. And I do that because if I can take their expertise and their experience and possibly their wisdom and make that to improve myself and my own opinions and my own environment, then I'm all the better for it. And so those things are very much worth the conversation required to gain that. So that's a little bit of a background about me, I suppose. I kind of went on a couple tangents there, but yeah. So that's me.
Awesome. Love it, Brent. And for those who don't know, AFNI is like a call center, contact center company, right? So you provide like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys provide like call center.
Yep. So we do.
Other companies.
Yeah, we're a BPO, business process outsourcing, right? So it's heavily a lot of call center work. We also do a decent bit of work with insurance companies. We started life as a collections company, so we still do some amount of collections, subrogation, arbitration, things like that. So it's a lot of business process, but in practice, a whole lot of really big call centers.
So, Brent, my question for you is how much of your background and experience at SecureWorks, working on the vendor side, and then in your different roles, how much of that really enabled you to kind of like hit the ground running as CISO at AFNI, and then change the MFA approach, change and reduce your cyber security insurance premium 50% over 2 years with YubiKey? I mean, you did some remarkable things right off the bat that I don't think I've ever seen another CISO do so quickly. Now, you had some motivation behind it, no doubt.
Yeah.
But to put that all together is pretty unique.
Yeah. So I used to say that it's kind of funny, and this is common amongst vendors, right? So you go and you're like, man, if I could be responsible for just like one environment, and that's all I had to do, like, feel like playing t-ball, man. I could kick some butt. I'll crank that, right? And I was right, like 100%. Like, because you go, and SecureWorks was a bit unique in that we did a couple thousand adversarial testing engagements a year, pen tests and web app tests and all that kind of stuff. We did a couple thousand incident response engagements a year, some proactive, some reactive. And we had this operations centers that I was a leader in for 15 years, where we caught bad guys early, right? And you get this like virtuous cycle. But when you have for 20 years, almost 20 years, when you're listening to all those threat researchers, all those incident responders, all those pen testers, all that stuff, and you go, dude, that's a really cool story how you own them in 3 seconds. What would have prevented it? Or like, hey, you handled this big like IR that's in the news. Like, what would have prevented it? And you hear the same things, right? You hear the very, very same things. You hear a lot about MFA. You hear about adequate logging and telling me ranting on logs versus telemetry and all that. But you hear a lot of the same recommendations, and they look like basic hygiene. They look like brushing your teeth in cybersecurity, right? And so then you get other validation. You read like the Verizon data breach investigation report, IR report, and you see like, oh, out of 20 or 30,000 events, like, where do people lose money? Ransomware, business, email compromise. What are the vectors for that? phishing, stolen credentials, maybe a little bit third party, like 0 days on external facing or vulnerabilities on externally facing stuff. And you go, okay, so if I make sure that 100% of users have strong MFA, for me, that's also YubiKey. Awesome. And I don't allow personal devices, which I don't really need to. And I make sure everything is patched externally. Okay. And I make sure, because I know everything, I make sure that all that has EDR installed. Then that's pretty good, right? Because then you look at that and you say, okay, so in theory, I'm not saying I'm going to do this, but in theory, I could publish every username and password I have for my entire company on the internet and not care. Okay. So in that environment, with everyone has a YubiKey, everyone is on my corporate laptop, and that corporate laptop or device has my EDR on it. How much do I care about phishing? Way, 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 way less than if I didn't have those things, right? How much do I care about credentials, stolen credentials? About the same, right? So did I just dramatically knock down my risk without spending much money or time? So then you take that and you say, okay, well, significant risk reduction is simple, easy, and cheap. Simple is a technology statement. We have all the technology that we need. Cool. Easy is the people process statement, right? That's my job. That's my job as a CISO to sell that. That wasn't hard, right? Okay. At least not for me. No, that's partially that I chose an environment in which I could succeed. I chose the culture of the company that I went to be one that was open to caring and listening to this. I actually interviewed to report to the CIO, and after I interviewed, the offer came back reporting to the CEO because they say, hey, that guy's in it to win it. That guy knows what's going on. Cool. Okay, that works for me. Feather my cap. First CISO role reported to CEO. Pretty cool. I'll take it. In retrospect, it would have worked just fine. It would have been virtually identical had I reported to the CIO, because you can lead from no matter where you are in the organization, right? And he and I share a brain. We are lockstep. We are very, very well aligned. It works fantastically well. And so I did these things, and it substantially reduces the risk. And really, what I've come to be able to articulate, and I'm going to argue that every CISO should have this as their mantra, right? Which is a big, big, huge statement. And that mantra is that my job is to mitigate material risk aside from nation state actors and make it really, really hard for nation state actors. Be a hardened target. And I'm going to argue that that is simple, easy, and cheap.
Okay.
Those are some big statements, and I get it. And I'm not saying, here's my joke. And it's true, but it's true. If you ask 100 people and say, are you an above average or below average driver? I'm going to say 95 will say that they are an above average driver. That means 45 of them are wrong, right? At least. Okay. If you go to 100 CISOs and you go, can you get to 100% strong MFA on every single one of your users is using strong MFA? I'm not even talking about YubiKey. It's just strong MFA. 90 plus of them will say, no, it doesn't work in my environment. Not for every single user. I go, okay. I've certainly run into environments where it was not feasible. It happens. Is it not feasible for 95%? I don't know. I made it work. I know large public universities that make it work. I know large companies with very diverse workforces that make it work. If I can make it work for over 10,000 employees, including most of those being call center agents in the Philippines, I think it's doable.
Awesome.
Right? So when you do those things, then you're in a position where nothing cyber related is urgent. There's plenty of important things, but nothing is urgent. And that looks like a very enjoyable life, right? Because you get to control your time, your schedule, your team, all of that. It's not firefighting. It's being able to be proactive. So when you combine that with an enjoyable work environment and solving problems and being able to focus on these things, then I've also had zero attrition. in 2 years, which is awesome, right? So zero attrition. I've had to retain some people. Like it's a very competitive market, no joke, right? But I'm able to do that. And when you have the credibility from kicking butt and taking names, then you have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to shift some from here to here, and we're going to do this and eliminate this and all that kind of stuff. And you end up being able to also do something that I'm doing, contracts expiring end of this year, where I'm giving a chunk of my budget back to my company. I don't need it. I'm good, right? How many people can do that? Not very many, but I can. So it's fun. It's cool. And it's nothing, but all of that is from lessons I learned from my experience, but also that anyone can learn by reading the Verizon Data Breach Report, listening to who's talking, and in questioning. Like, I feel like a lot of CISOs start and end with NIST says. And I'm not denigrating NIST. I think it's great. I think frameworks are fine, all that. Mm. I just think they're heavily misused. I'm darn sure not going to do it to start with and say, I'm going to set my roadmap based on NIST says. I don't care what NIST says. I care what mitigates material risk. If that happens to be NIST, okay.
Yeah, those are some great points, Brent. I appreciate that. Definitely back to the basics piece and knowing your company culture and how to communicate, I think are the two biggest things that resonate. You mentioned, you have not necessarily urgent things, but a lot of important things that you're working on. Curious if you can share a little bit of your perspective on, what do you consider as important right now? What are you focused on, both for you as well as your security team, right? The folks around you, and how are you prioritizing those?
Yeah. So I think in turn, Andy Ellis is a very well-known CISO, former CISO of AFNI. Now he's an operating partner with YL Ventures. And here's this thing called the pyramid of pain, right? Which boils down to probability and impact, right? Which is, but in a little bit different terms. So I do a lot of work on like, hey, explain or tell me a story where not having this cost my company a whole lot of money. Right. The other way to look at, or another way, his pyramid of pain is how surprising would this be and how bad would it be? If it is like completely unsurprising, like I expect this to happen tomorrow and it would be a dumpster fire, like you better take care of that like pronto. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to do a risk analysis. We don't need to do a NIST assessment or say, hey, there's a dumpster fire. I think I'm going to go put it out. That's probably a good idea. Just go do that. Right? We don't need to talk, just freaking do it, right? So those are kind of tier 0 risk, right? And then if you go down the pyramid, then kind of tier 1 are like, okay, I'd be a little bit surprised by this, and it would be pretty darn bad. Fix those, right? And that's really what those 4 or 5 hills that I will die on, that's what those did. And then you get down into tier 2 kind of stuff. Like, hey, this would be fairly surprising, and it would also be kind of sort of nasty. Okay. And that's fine. So, but of those, priority doesn't necessarily matter a lot, right? It's like, pick one. So because this isn't my team that can go solve all these problems, right? I have to work with IT and product management and ops and all these people, right? So I go and they're like, hey, here's some things. Think we can fix that? Yeah. Okay. When? And I don't care personally about a deadline. I care about incremental progress over time, assuming that I stop the bleeding, right? Stop the bleeding and then make progress over time. And now where I am, I'm down to like tier 3 risks. So I'm down to stuff like, well, you know what? Like we enforced retention on this, and this, but people could maybe circumvent it if they had like an email archive, a PSC file. Okay, well, let's go find all the PSC files. Oh, okay, fine. Right. Is that the biggest deal ever? No. Does it cost any money to go find? Not really. What's it cost? Cuts a little bit of time. And my hair's not on fire. It's not urgent, right? But it is important. So go knock those out. And whatever order you do it in, it doesn't really matter. And where I am now, like I'm knocking, 5, 10, 15 of those things out a quarter. Where it's one of those like, sure. Like, should we move print services from our old on-prem domain up into Azure Cloud Print Services? Yeah. Is it the biggest deal in the world? No. Right? Oh, could we? Hey, let's say a advanced bad guy physically broke into our building and was physically on the network. Is that likely? No. Could it happen? It could. Right? Am I willing to spend a little bit of money and run a project to implement 802.1x across the enterprise? Sure. Would that also give me benefit over here on Wi-Fi to go fully 100% passwordless in the next 12 to 24 months? Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. Because guess what's better than 100% YubiKeys? Passwordless. Okay, let's do that. Right. So if I can ring the bell on passwordless and say, hey, we did it, or we did it for 15%, or we did it for 85%, or whatever, 99% of the company, that's cool because YubiKeys are awesome and great. But might there be a workaround against them in 5 years? Maybe. I don't know. But I mean, currently the only thing I know better than a bunch of YubiKeys is passwordless. So, okay, let's move there. And while we're at it, let's get rid of anything on-prem, like no on-prem file shares, and let's do everything we can to turn off on-prem AD, just because I hear it's bad. People who are way smarter than me say that's bad. So I say, okay, well, let's go kill that. Okay, fine, right? So all that kind of stuff, right, is all not urgent. It is important. It's not the biggest deal in the world. But if I can knock it out with very little time and effort, sure, why not?
Got a question, and we're going to switch gears or pivot to recent happenings with the SEC. As you know, SolarWinds got embroiled in last July. I guess it was the SEC said, Mr. CISO and CEO, we're holding you both responsible for material breach disclosure and missing the boat there. I have an opinion on this, but I'd be really curious on yours and how you see your role and maybe even your relationship with your CEO and with as a CISO, how you see that changing, and what do you think of the SEC's new regulations?
Yeah. So I have no opinion that I'm willing to put out there publicly on Tim Brown and SolarWinds because I don't know the situation. Right. I know what the SEC said. That's all fine. I can tell you that if a situation, I am completely and totally willing to take advantage of someone else's lessons that they are learning, right? So if a situation is really, really good or really, really bad for me or for someone else, I am perfectly okay taking value out of that. One thing that I learned a long, long time ago is to think through how things are going to sound when the court reporter reads it back to you, right? So if my program, if any email I send, if any conversation I have, if anything I say on a podcast or say privately or put an email or say on Teams or anything were read by the court of public opinion or the SEC or fellow CISOs or anyone, what would it sound like, right? What would it look like? Yeah. Now, I have fanatical levels of integrity. I say the same things all the time in any environment. And I'm completely 100% willing to own every single thing that I say, every single thing that I do. And there are times where there's a reality, right? This is not a binary 100% thing. It is. Integrity is, but there's spin, there's nuance, right? Yeah. And I understand that. But even those private conversations, if those were exposed to the public, if all my fellow CISOs evaluated me, if the SEC evaluated me, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with anyone saying that's credible. I might be right, I might be wrong, but that's credible. It's credible, it's transparent, it reeks of integrity, right? And it's defensible. And I remain convinced that if that is true, that I will be just fine.
Yeah, reeks of integrity is a great way to put that. I was at a ISSA event this week, and they're talking about, you can't just worry about risk in security's perspective, and you can't even just worry about risk in the business's perspective anymore. You have to worry about risk when you're sitting in front of a court of law. Well, and a court of law is a different world, right? They're talking about what's the reasonable amount of cause here? What's the reasonable amount that Brent did
Yes.
to protect his company? That sort of stuff. So that's a great way to put it.
And again, I seriously, I do not know anything. I only know what the SEC said. I know what SolarWinds has responded to. I'm actually at a conference in May from Digital Director Network, which is fantastic. And the CEO of SolarWinds is the keynote. So he will be speaking about their response to the SEC and their perspective. I've been on webinars with both Joel Sullivan and Tim Brown. I have zero judgment on either of them. I am simply saying from my perspective, like my lesson learned is defensibility and is in fanatical levels of integrity, right? And so, for example, after Tim Brown and all that happened, I went to my team on Teams, right? And I said, just so it is very, very well said, this is what I believe. If that is not true, if you disagree with that at all, speak up now and keep on speaking up, right? Because this is what I am communicating to our executive team. This is what I believe. This hinges on this, that like my 4 hills really, really better be true. Really better be true. Otherwise, we got problems, right? So I emphasize that. I'm like, I believe this because of, I believe X because of Y, right? Don't let me tell a lie. Don't let me believe something that isn't 100% true, right? When I, or substantially true, or how true, and like, because that's another thing. Like, as I don't know, but as I read the SEC complaint, right? If I say something is 100% true publicly, I know that it might be 99.9% true on a day-to-day basis, right? I have 100% coverage of EDR. Guess what? I know that on any given day, I'm missing between 2 and 5 machines. And we identify those and we cut a ticket and we get those fixed. So I know that there's extremely minuscule microscopic gap, right? But it's substantial true. Now, if I say something publicly is 100% and reality is more like 30%, now we got problems, right? And so, and that's why, but again, when nothing is urgent, but they're important things, that's where I can go uncovering rocks. And that's where I can go, like, one thing I loved about being at SecureWorks for so long is that I knew where all the bodies were buried. Like, I've been there, done that for a long, long time. I know where all the bodies were buried. I knew what was a little bit janky, what was just fine. And I wrote a lot of the janky stuff, right? I mean, and I called out, like, this is janky, right? But it worked. Like, if something is janky, but it runs without fault for 10 years, is it really janky? Really, right? So I do that with my team. I do that with people who've been working here for 28 years or whatever. And I go, so if you were me, what would you worry about? And they're like, oh, I wouldn't worry about this. Like, I asked about X. I'm like, oh, I wouldn't worry about that. But you might want to dig in a little bit over here. I'm like, okay, right? And so you go, and when you ask enough people and you have that relationship over a long enough period of time, and you go uncovering a whole lot of rocks, eventually you've got to say, okay, in this area, I'm pretty sure that there are no big, huge rocks. Because I've been over this area repeatedly, and I've had other people go over this area repeatedly, and I'm telling you, there's not a big-ass rock in the middle of the room. I can be reasonably sure of that, right? Now, if you know about the big rock, then you better say it, and even if you say it, you better go fix it, and you better go, like, I can understand the perspective. I really, really can, where you say something publicly that you believe it to be true, and then you find out that that is not true later. I can understand, rather than going back and saying, oh, I was wrong. I understand, like, fix that in the next 3 months. I get that that might be political reality. I understand, right? I'm not decrying anyone, but you can't just say, hey, this is a really big risk, and then let it go for 3 years. Like, that don't work, right? So yeah, reeks of integrity. That's, maybe I'm naive. It is possible I am naive. It's possible that would not suit me, but I've been a CISO 2 years, right? I saw Clorox after their big thing. They posted for a CISO role, and every CISO was like, oh, no way. There's no way I would do that. I'm like, hell yeah, I'd do that. That'd be awesome. Like, that'd be fantastic doing that. Like, I'd do that in a heartbeat. I'd love that job. Like, you can't go anywhere but up. Like, you bring reeks of integrity and all the tailwinds you have there, you'd be like playing T-ball. Not really.
All right. Thank you.
So we've talked a few times, Brent, about how you've worked at SecureWorks, and you post on LinkedIn all the time about interacting with vendors, working with vendors, all that sort of stuff. Curious, your thoughts on kind of what do you think is the best way for vendors out there to sell to CISOs and security, and B, what do you consider a great vendor? And not, you don't have to like name a specific vendor, but what does a great vendor do? Like, what are those check boxes for you?
Well, the answers are really kind of the same, right? Which is relational selling or forming a relationship, right? And that looks a whole lot of different ways. But so here's how I encounter one. I'm a little bit of a unique bird amongst CISOs in that I voluntarily meet with a whole lot of vendors Friday afternoons, right? That's a little bit unique. So I encounter a lot of new things. And I do that to validate my own thinking, to either strengthen or weaken my opinions, which is fantastic.
Sure.
Other ways are my reseller. I have a fantastic relationship with Guy Point Security, my reseller. I love my guy. All right. If he tells me, hey, I think you should look at this vendor, I'll look at that vendor. All right. Whether I'm a buyer or not. And I'm almost never a buyer, by the way. But I meet with people, right? Another way is my CISO network, right? So I'm part of multiple, but at least one network of about 600 CISOs, right? And people posting there like, I needed a PAM solution. So I went in there and said, hey, who should I look at a PAM? And they gave me 2 names. And I went and called my reseller and said, give me a meeting with these 2 people. Hired one of them. Awesome. Delinea. Awesome. Great. Woo. But even that's how I initially encounter, right? Yep. Then there's also, I encounter new vendors at certain events, right? Not all events, but certain. So there's 3 tiers of events. There's the speed dating events. I don't like them. No one does. There's the go away for 2 or 3 days event. Those are pretty cool. Those can be okay, right? Not bad. And then there are the kind of local 1-day events. Things like C-Vision International is my favorite. Ivanto puts on very high quality. Cyber Risk Alliance puts on some high quality events. And there again, I get my network of other CISOs, but I also get exposed to vendors, right? Yeah. So I'll tell you, I went to a C-Vision International event here in September of 23, and I wrote on my phone, I had like 5 takeaways, right? 3 of them came from other CISOs, 2 of them came from vendors, right? So if a vendor stands up and educates me and I write it down and take it away, that's value, right? Now, here's the thing. Did any of that show up in a Salesforce? Nope. None of that showed up in Salesforce. Guess how many times I've recommended vendors that I don't personally buy? Enough that I should have done deal reg, right? So I recommend vendors all the time based on relationships. So that's how I encounter them. But even once I encounter these new vendors, or sponsor a dinner event where a CISO or someone comes to speak about an adjacent topic, right? Sponsor a dinner before or after one of these events, right? How much does a dinner cost where you get your sellers and say, identify some people, and hey, you mentioned that you're going to the C-Vision event. Well, why don't you hang out and wait out traffic by having dinner with us afterwards? Okay, I might do that. How much does a dinner cost? A little bit, not a lot, right? And a lot of people look at the DGI role and they say, well, in cyber it has between a 1% and 3% success rate, right? And you have a cost to acquire per lead of about $800-ish, right? So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that you are mildly annoying / pissing off 97 to 99% of your target audience, right? That's the way I look at it, because I know how I deal with cold outreach, but I also know that the people who focus on the relationships at events get me to drive an hour and a half to downtown Chicago just to go to dinner with them, even though I'm not a buyer, nor never will be a buyer, because I like them, they like me, and they also know that works out. I went to I subscribe to IANS. It's a expert advisory thing that is fantastic. They had an event in Chicago. One of the vendors there was Grip Security, Leor. Guy I know for a long time. I'm sitting there just talking to him because I like him, right? And we're talking, and I was like, "Hey, man!" Now I'm part of the little CISO special like room thing. We get the better lunch when we're off in a different room, right? And I was like, "Hey, man, come on back with me." He's like, "Oh, I'm a vendor. I'm not." I'm like, "No one's gonna tell me no." So I took him back, sat down. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Leor, meet my buddy Rudy." And they talked. I have no idea if they did business or not, but I introduced them to one another. And I know that when or if I have the need for what Grip Security does, I know I'm calling Leor, right? Based on a relationship that he formed 2 years ago. So, and all of that stuff I just said, none of that showed up in Salesforce. Not a single bit of it, right? So that's good. I'll mention one other thing here that I think is a brand new thing and very cool. I'm working with a brand new startup called Connect.io, Konnect.io. And that is a means for CISOs and vendors to get connected without all the junk, right, that CISOs don't like. For that, both CISOs and vendors need to be part of it. And I like it. One of the things I like about it most is that I can connect with the vendor and I can clarify right away. I have an active project. I'm looking for more information for a future project, or I'm just exploring. For me, it's always exploring, right? I'm just like, if your regional director calls me as an executive sponsor, we're going to have issues. I don't like that. I don't like the hard sell thing at all. I've been on that side. I know all about it. I don't like it, right? So that gives another way to just connect with vendors, hear what they got to say. The other thing, like I'm part of a CISO network, CISO Society, 600 CISOs, and we have startup advisory or startup showcases, right, where companies get 15 minutes. So all of these things, none of them are very expensive. And I have tangible examples where really, really small companies pre-seed get in front of me and get my time and talk to me all the time. And that happens. And I'm not the only CISO who does this. And I refer people. So it's not just the big boys who can do this. It's even the small scale. It's the attitude of relational selling. It is so critical. So I went on a bit of a rant there. I talk about that a lot, but.
No, that's great. And yeah, it's so true. I mean, people, especially I see this a lot in security, right? And I obviously, our podcast knows this. I work as a seller, right? So
yeah.
If you are just trying to sell someone something, they're just going to see right through that, right? And that's not that's not how business gets done. We all know that, right? There's certain outliers and scenarios where that's the case, but just being a human, right, and being able to communicate with people and know that at the end of the day, if they don't buy what you're selling, that's okay, right? You can still be their friend. You could still hang out with them. And yeah, long-term, sure, maybe it benefits you and that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I worked for SecureWorks for 19 years. I helped build the place, right? My fingerprints are all over all sorts of stuff there. Did I come in and buy SecureWorks? No. You know why? I was in 3-year deals. I'm not going to double my spend on something, for God's sakes. It's not going to happen. Even now, like, I'm actually not going to do business with SecureWorks. And I like them. I love them. No issue. They're frankly selling something that I don't need. So,
well, there's a fit and there's fit and good fit. And there's just not a fit right now.
And there's timing, right? I mean, I know so many companies. I'm like, that is a fantastic offering. That is an elegant solution to a valid problem. And in many environments, that's a very big problem. And in my environment, it's just not. So
I want to ask you one question, and Shane, if you're okay with this, on AI, you talked about timing. About 10 years ago, there was a small slew of companies that were coming out with solutions that touted AI, deep learning, machine learning, and they made it sound like your analyst wouldn't have to do anything. And that was absolutely not the case. It was way oversold. Yeah. But in the last year, 2 years, we've seen an enormous uptick in capability with AI platforms, with large language models, large language action. What's your thought on the future of AI with respect to security and making your operation more smoother?
Yeah, I have I have a talk track about this where I actually asked him like, all right, do you guys think that AI is like Skynet, Terminator, going to kill us all, or is it like an iPhone, which is like super innovative, right? Super transformational.
It's Skynet, definitely Skynet, right?
It's definitely Skynet. I'm like, yeah, but I tell you, so you're right. So 10 years ago, even before, there was machine learning and deep learning. And with the advent of cloud, all of a sudden we had a boatload of storage that was cheap. We had a boatload of compute, right? So we could do things, say 2015, 16, 17, that we could not do in 2012, 13, 14, right? And my company, SecureWorks, we did all that, right? And you learn, so when you really dive in, you learn the slight differences between AI, machine learning, deep learning, all this stuff. And you also learn that you dive in and you go and you talk to the data scientists and you say, okay, like you get their experience and expertise translated into wisdom, and you learn things like, you learn the same things that you learned when you were in kindergarten banging stuff together. Don't try to put a square peg in a round hole, right? So define the problem appropriately, right? And use the right tool for that problem. And then you have to look and you're like, okay, how often do you fail? You're like, oh, all the time, like constantly. Like you don't get a defined outcome. You get the opportunity to learn more about the problem, right? And that's why I think a good thing for CISOs to ask when anyone is talking about AI, machine learning, and deep learning, and all this stuff, is to ask how many data scientists they have, right? It's not even developers. How many data scientists do you employ, right? And then you say, okay, what's a good efficacy rate? And it depends on what your problem statement is. Like my understanding is that you can fix vulnerable code in a very well-defined, like 5 languages with like 90+% efficacy. That's pretty rock star. And if you're looking at trying to identify risky sign-in behavior based on like authentication data, you might be looking at a 2% efficacy rate. So I always position, and this is before Gen AI stuff, I always position AI. I was like, all right, listen, like AI can in theory like make your coffee in the morning for you. Like it'll do everything. Like it'll make your bed, make your coffee, do everything.
Real time at line rate speeds.
Yeah, instantly on the box, millisecond, right? All this junk, right? I'm like, here's the deal. All the stuff that we talk about, all the crazy awesome use cases for deep learning, machine learning, all that are valid, and they work and all that, but they're like 1% of the difference. Because guess what? You don't need crazy machine learning to go, hey, Mimikatz is bad. Flag that, right? Go fix the dumpster fire. Don't worry about AI if you don't have a strong MFA, for God's sakes. I mean, come on now. Now with Gen AI, it's probably more than a 1% difference, right? Yeah. You get, depending on the use case, depending on your ability to define the problem statement, you might get some pretty good rockstar levels of efficacy out of some Gen AI stuff. And that's awesome and great. But here's what I always go back to with Gen AI and AI in general. Like, who do you think is going to use tools, Gen AI, faster and more completely? Good guys or bad guys?
Bad guys.
Bad guys. Do bad guys have steering committees and change control boards? Nope. Are they already using it really effectively? When does Microsoft Security Copilot go GA? How much is it going to cost? Okay. So, and how unified do you think bad guys are going to be in there? But how well are they going to democratize this? Probably pretty well. Yep. How well will we democratize it? Does all this sound like the fundamental nature of cybersecurity in general, just faster? Just me. So you can fight fire with fire, right? You can set backfires. You can fight fire with fire. My AI is going up against your AI. It might not work out. You can fight fire with water, too. It works. I don't know if anyone knew, but like fighting fire with water looks like sidestepping some of these problems, right? Guess how much I care about really super duper, really good phishing emails. with 100% YubiKeys. It's cool, but that enables me to focus and send the email that I sent yesterday to our data science team and my CIO and say, hey, I was thinking about how we might be able to leverage this to improve the interactive bots in the chat sessions with our client, right? I'm not that guy. I'm not data science. I'm not a crazy AI guy, but I understand some of this stuff, and I have ideas about how to help my company do that. Like, how can we get ahead? How can we emphasize the benefits and sidestep the detriments, right? Sidestep the cons. And that's what I try to do. I try to fight fire with water, right? Now, is all the AI stuff cool and great? Yeah, sure. Okay. But is it, I mean, like I said, if you're not 100% strong in FA, I'm not worried about LLM security. And like, go fix the dumpster fire first.
Yeah, for sure. Love it. Cool, Brent. I've got one last question in this. I actually brought a prop for this question. As you and I talked earlier, and I loved your story about this. So I want to know, what is your favorite NFL team?
Ah, that's nice. Thank you. I am a Green Bay Packers fan, and let me tell you why. I am from St. Louis. The football Cardinals left when I was like 6 years old. So, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. The Rams came when I was in high school, 1995, I think, 96, 97, somewhere in there, right? So I became a Rams fan. I went to school at University of Missouri, Columbia, in the middle of Missouri. I met my wife there. My wife and I were both diehard Rams fans. Greatest show on Turf Valley. Even after they were no good, right? We were still fans. We were still huge fans. We moved to South Carolina, and then we moved up to outside Chicago. I'm like, I'm a Rams fan. That's what I am. And then they moved. And not only did they move, but when they moved, they flipped off the city of St. Louis. And that's my hometown. I can't do that. But I live outside Chicago. I can't root for a Chicago team. I can't. So I was homeless a little bit. And I was like, am I going to change my sports team allegiance as a grown-ass man? Is that really what's going to happen here? I'm like, okay. So I did. I decided to become a Rams fan. My wife grew up in Central Illinois, was not a big football fan, but her family was kind of sort of Bears fans. So she was undecided. It made my kids undecided. And I was like, this isn't working. And I was like, man of the house, we're a Packers family. So after a year, after one season, she go, okay, we'll be a Packers family. We got all the jerseys for Christmas. My youngest has 7 Packers jerseys. I mean, it's a big deal. But she turned my kids into Chicago Cubs fans. Irritates me. The other aspect of this, I felt bad. I felt bad that I was a grown man and changed my allegiance. But I spoke to the NFL in 2018, I think. And it was like Verizon and SecureWorks were the only vendors invited. And I'm talking to their IT security nerds, right? And man, these people act like their IT infrastructure is their playbook or something. Like they don't talk. And I'm like, I'm trying to break the ice. And so I'm there to talk about cloud security. And I was like, hey, how many of you have even test workloads running in the cloud? And no one raised their hand. I said, so let me get this straight. I'm speaking at 3 o'clock on a Thursday, 1 block away from Bourbon Street in New Orleans, about cloud security, and none of y'all are using cloud. I was like, thanks. That's cool. So I'm trying to break the ice because they're sitting there and just, it's not working, right? And I'm like, all right, y'all want to hear who my favorite team is? And they're like, yeah. So I told them that story. And I got permission from the Bears, the Packers, and the Rams to be being Green Bay Packers fan. So I got special dispensation from the league to change my allegiance as a grown man. So I'm legit. The Packers Nation loves me. I love them. It's great. We're a Packers family. We're not talking about the Cubs, and it's all good. So that I'm a big NFL guy. I've been married 22 years. You want to test your marriage a little bit? Co-manage a fantasy football team with your wife.
No, thank you.
I think we're 10 or maybe 11 seasons. We've won the championship 3 times.
Oh, wow.
There you
We're
go.
now she does all the podcast stuff. Read the podcast, all that. I do the algorithms. I'm the machine learning, deep learning, average. I'm the Fantasy Pros guy. So I'm the algorithm guy. She's the gut feel kind of person, and somewhere in between there, we make a team work.
All right. So you've been a Packers fan for probably at least more than 5 years, because you mentioned 2018. Have you been to Lambeau?
No.
No.
No. But I did get to go to week 1 this year. I got to go to Bears Packers at Soldier Field in a luxury booth. It was me and one other Packers fan, and the Packers whooped up on the Bears, and it was glorious.
Nice.
It was so much fun.
We're spoiled. I'm a Packers fan as well. So very cool. All right. Well, we'll have to get you to Lambeau at some point. But
man, get me. I will go in a heartbeat.
Very cool.
So you've kind of promoted some approaches as well as groups and such, but this is an opportunity for you to kind of finish us off with a shameless plug. So whatever you're proud of, the stage is yours.
Geez, I don't. Well, I'll take this a little bit different direction. One thing that my wife and I do and have done is we're foster parents. So my youngest child is adopted, and we are foster parents as well. And here's the unique thing about being a foster parent is that you come to realize that not everyone is called to be a foster parent, but we are all called to care, right? And there are a wide variety of ways that people can help the foster community, because like defending helpless children is pretty much like a universally accepted good thing, right? So helping that organization can work in a lot of different ways. One way that I encourage CISOs to do that especially is we are used to dealing with some level of corporate process, bureaucracy kind of thing. We are generally comfortable speaking in boardroom type environments to executives or to judges in courtrooms, things like that. And depending on where you are in the country, they may call it guardian ad litem, or they may call it CASA, court appointed special advocate, right? And every county is a little bit different. In my county, CASAs are afforded a special voice of respect, I should say. So it'll be like, the judge will be like, okay, yeah, cool. Hear what the social worker says. Hear what the attorney say. I want to hear what the CASA says. And I am not a CASA. My wife is a CASA, and she's able to help like 1 or 2 cases at a time, put plenty of time and effort into it, and help a child, right? Help advocate for them in the court system in a way that those of us on the sales side, those of us in cybersecurity on the kind of executive side, we're comfortable with this process. We don't get intimidated by judges and courtrooms, things like that. So we can help in that way. That's a fantastic way to do it. Also, frankly, as a sales guy or saleswoman, that can help you develop a really strong sense of empathy, and that will also dramatically help your career as a salesperson. So there's my shameless plug for care about CASAs and foster kids and all that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time today, Brent. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.